There are moments in life so quiet, so subtle, that they go unnoticed by those who are too distracted by the noise of the world. Yet these moments hold within them a profound shift, a whisper from the unseen, a sign that the universe is gently preparing to open a door. But to hear it, one must be still. And stillness is rare in a world that measures worth by motion. Most people go through life pleading for change, longing for love, aching for success, craving peace. But when the change begins, it doesn't come with fireworks or applause. It comes as emptiness, as confusion, as loss. And so they miss it. They misinterpret the very signs they once prayed to see. They think the falling apart is failure. They think the silence is abandonment. They think the weariness is weakness. But they are wrong. These are not signs of being forsaken. They are the birth pains of something greater. In a distant land, beyond the familiar reach of towns and trade, lived a man whose life had become a series of hardships. He was not lazy. He did not lack effort. Yet nothing he pursued seemed to bear fruit. His work dissolved into dust. His relationships withered. His faith began to tremble under the weight of disappointment. And when all that he held dear began to fade, he turned his eyes to the mountains. There was a legend of a hermit who lived at the peak of the tallest mountain, a man who spoke rarely, but whose words had changed lives. With nothing left to lose and everything within him begging for understanding, the man began the ascent. The climb was cruel. Cold winds scraped his skin, and narrow paths tested his resolve. Days passed. The trees grew sparse. The silence thickened. But something within him, perhaps desperation, perhaps the final breath of hope, kept him climbing. When he reached the summit, he found the hermit seated beneath a weathered tree. The man bowed deeply, his voice unsteady. "Master," he said, "I have given everything. I have fought, I have waited, I have bled for a life I cannot seem to claim. I feel abandoned by fate, forgotten by whatever forces rule this world." The hermit opened his eyes slowly and studied the man, not with judgment, but with a quiet seeing, as if he could read not just the face, but the years written behind it. "You are not far," the hermit said gently. "Far from what?" the man asked. "From receiving what you've been seeking." The man blinked, confused. "But I've lost everything. How can you say I'm close?" "Because," the hermit replied, "you are beginning to experience the signs, the true signs, but you've mistaken them as misfortune." And there, beneath that sky, heavy with clouds and wisdom, the hermit began to speak of the 5 signs that always appear before something extraordinary enters a life. The first sign, he said, is loss. When something great is near, the hermit told him, the unnecessary will begin to fall away. People, habits, comforts, even dreams that no longer align with your true path will dissolve. It feels cruel. It feels like the world is taking from you. But it is clearing space. It is pruning the tree so it can bloom again. The man thought of the friends who had left, of the doors that had shut, of the plans that had crumbled. He had seen them as betrayals, as failures. But now a new lens began to form. Perhaps they were signs. Perhaps they were the clearing. The second sign, said the hermit, is silence. A stillness so deep it can feel unbearable. It arrives after the loss. You'll look around and see no movement, hear no answer to your prayers. This is the moment most give up. They believe nothing is happening. But that is the illusion. In truth, the silence is where the change begins. The man nodded. He had felt it, the quiet void where once there was noise. He had feared it meant he was stuck. But what if he was being still because something within was changing? The third sign, the hermit continued, is the test. Life will challenge you, not to punish you, but to strengthen you. You will face trials that feel unbearable. You will question everything. But this is the refining. The storm does not test the weak, it tests the strong to prepare them for what's next. The man clenched his fists. The tests. Yes, he knew them well. He had walked through fire and been left with ashes. And yet, he was still here, listening, breathing. Maybe he was stronger than he believed. The fourth sign, said the hermit, his eyes softening, is the inner knowing. When the worst has passed, there comes a strange peace, a quiet certainty. Nothing has changed outwardly, but inside you feel it. You know something is coming. This is the whisper of destiny. You must trust it. And indeed, in recent weeks, though nothing had improved, the man had felt moments of unexpected calm, as if some invisible hand rested on his shoulder saying, "Just a little longer." He had doubted it, but now he began to believe. The fifth and final sign, the hermit said, is the shift, sudden, unseen. A new door opens, a person appears, a realization dawns, and everything changes. But only those who endured the first four signs will be ready to receive it. The man sat in silence, absorbing the weight of those words. Could it be that what he had seen as ruin was actually rebirth? That his weariness was the final threshold? "You must go now," the hermit said, rising slowly. "Return to your life. Watch. Listen. And when the moment comes, do not hesitate. Step into it. It is yours." And so the man descended the mountain. The path was no easier going down, but something had changed within him. The world was the same, but he was not. And within weeks, the signs unfolded as the hermit had said. A stranger crossed his path with an offer. An opportunity opened that he hadn't dared to imagine. And because he had not given up, because he had understood the signs, he was ready. This is not just his story, this is yours. If you find yourself in the ache of loss, in the hush of stillness, in the fire of tests, in the trembling knowing that something is near, hold fast. Do not run from the signs. They are not there to torment you. They are there to prepare you. You are not being punished. You are being readied. The moment of receiving is not some distant promise. It is drawing near. And when it arrives, you will see that nothing was wasted. Not the tears, not the silence, not the struggle. Everything was shaping you. Everything was leading you home. Sometimes the most profound shifts in our lives come not in the form of triumph, but in what feels like unraveling. And while we often think the path to greatness should be marked by clarity, certainty, and reward, the truth is that the soul transforms in the dark, not the light. The real growth comes when everything you thought you needed is taken away, and you're left only with yourself. That's when the questions get louder. Why is this happening? Why now? Why me? And those questions, though born in suffering, carry the seeds of your becoming. The man who descended the mountain didn't return to the same life. On the surface, yes, the streets were the same, the faces familiar, but his eyes had changed. His understanding had shifted. He no longer saw loss as something to mourn. He saw it as a sacred messenger. Every door that closed was not rejection, it was redirection. Every ending wasn't failure, it was clearing. And the more he embraced this truth, the more life seemed to align around him. But even with new perspective, the journey wasn't effortless. The universe doesn't reward wisdom with ease. It rewards it with deeper challenges, because now you are strong enough to face them. The man found himself tested again, not in the same ways, but in sharper, subtler ones. Opportunities came dressed in distractions. False promises lured him toward old patterns. But now he was more awake. He could feel when something wasn't right, even if it looked perfect. And he learned to say no, not just to others, but to his own impulses. That was a deeper strength than he ever expected to need. There was a woman in the village who had watched him for years. She remembered when he was filled with frustration, always trying to make things happen, to control every outcome. She noticed the difference in him now, how he moved more slowly, spoke more thoughtfully, laughed more easily. One day she approached him and asked, "What changed you?" He smiled softly, not with pride, but with remembrance. "I stopped running from the silence," he said, "and in it, I found something I had never known before, myself." And isn't that the truth for all of us? That we spend so much of life running, from silence, from stillness, from solitude, only to discover that those very things hold the answers we've been seeking. It's in the quiet moments when the noise dies down and the distractions fall away that the soul begins to speak. But we have to be willing to listen. There's a story the hermit once told about a man who carried a heavy sack through every village he visited. People would ask what was inside, and he'd always answer, "Everything I need." But the sack grew heavier and the man grew weary. Eventually, he could walk no more. A child came to him and asked, "Why don't you open it?" The man hesitated. He had carried it so long, he feared what would happen if he let it go. But eventually, curiosity won. He opened the sack, only to find it filled with stones. Beautiful, yes, but useless. And in that moment, he wept. Not because the sack was empty, but because he realized how much of his life he had spent carrying what he never needed. We all carry things, stories, identities, attachments that we think define us. We cling to relationships that no longer feed us, to goals that no longer excite us, to versions of ourselves that no longer reflect who we truly are. And then, when the universe begins to strip those things away, we resist. We mourn. We try to glue the pieces back together. But what if the falling apart is the mercy? What if the emptying is the answer to the prayer you don't even remember making? It takes courage to release. It takes even more courage to remain open after heartbreak, to stay soft after betrayal, to trust the process when nothing around you makes sense. But that's what transformation demands. Not a fierce grip, but a sacred surrender. Not a desperate grasping for what was, but a quiet acceptance of what is. The man who had returned from the mountain began to live differently. He rose with the sun, not to chase the day, but to greet it. He no longer measured his worth by his productivity. He measured it by his presence. He spoke less, listened more. He didn't rush into decisions. He waited for his inner knowing to rise. And because of this, life began to meet him where he stood. One day, a stranger arrived in the village. He was bruised by the world, bitter and cynical. He scoffed at the man's calm, accused him of being naive. "You live as if everything is a gift," the stranger said, "but I see only suffering." The man didn't argue. He simply nodded. I used to see it that way too, until I realized that every loss, every silence, every unanswered prayer was leading me somewhere I could not see at the time. "But it's hard," the stranger replied. "This world takes and takes." "It does," the man said, "but it also gives, just not always in the way we expect." And that's the truth we must learn to carry, that life does not always make sense in the moment, that the very things we resist may be the very things we need, that the people who leave may be making space for someone better, that the job you lost may be pushing you toward your purpose, that the heartbreak you feared would destroy you may actually be the doorway to your becoming. The signs are always there, but we must learn how to read them. When you find yourself exhausted for no reason, disconnected from what used to excite you, more aware of what's missing than what's present, pause. Listen. You are not broken. You are shifting. The life you built is no longer aligned with who you are becoming, and your soul knows it before your mind can catch up. Trust that. Let the unraveling happen. Let the silence teach you. Let the fire purify you. You are not being undone. You are being remade. And when the time is right, when you are no longer clinging, no longer pleading, no longer performing, you will rise. Not as a version of who you used to be, but as someone entirely new. Someone forged by fire. Someone softened by surrender. Someone finally ready to receive what they once could only chase. Because the greatest things don't arrive when you fight for them. They arrive when you align with them. And alignment comes not from effort, but from release. So if you find yourself in the midst of stillness, of confusion, of loss, don't rush to escape it. Sit with it. Learn from it. Let it transform you. Because on the other side of this darkness, there is something waiting that your heart has longed for. Something too sacred to be forced, too precious to be hurried. And it will come. Not because you chased it, but because you finally became the version of yourself who is ready to receive it. There's a kind of beauty that can only be seen with eyes that have cried, a strength that can only be built by hands that once trembled. The path to becoming is not paved with constant victories. It is paved with surrender, silence, and 100 small deaths. The death of expectations, the death of old identities, the death of who we thought we had to be. And in their place, something deeper emerges, not louder, not flashier, but more true. The man who had returned from the mountain began to notice something extraordinary. Life was no longer something he needed to chase. It moved toward him, not because he had mastered some secret, but because he had let go of control. He allowed things to leave. He allowed things to unfold. And in that allowing, a new rhythm began to carry him. It wasn't without pain, but the pain no longer broke him. It simply passed through like wind through trees, like rain over stone. There was a young girl in the village who had recently lost everything. Her family's home burned in a fire, and what remained of their lives was ash and memory. She came to the man, hoping for comfort, for words to make the ache less unbearable. But he didn't offer platitudes. He didn't rush to fix her pain. Instead, he sat beside her, allowing the silence between them to stretch and settle. Finally, she asked, "Why does it hurt so much? Why does everything have to fall apart before something better comes?" He looked at her with gentle eyes and replied, "Because the soul doesn't grow in comfort. It grows in the spaces where the world no longer makes sense. It grows when what you thought would last is gone, and you are forced to find something deeper, something that cannot be burned or broken." She didn't fully understand then, but his words stayed with her, and in time they became the thread she held onto as she rebuilt her world, brick by brick, breath by breath. The truth is, most people pray for change, but they fear the process. They want to be transformed, but they resist the path that leads there. They want light without passing through the dark. They want strength without being tested. But the universe doesn't work that way. It doesn't hand you your blessings while your hands are still full of things not meant for you. It asks you to release, to trust, to wait. It's easy to trust when everything is working, when the money flows, when the love is returned, when the path is clear. But real trust is born in the void, when there are no answers, no signs, and the silence feels endless. That is where faith is forged. Not the faith that everything will work out how you want, but the faith that whatever happens, you will be okay. That even in the breaking, you are being built. The man used to chase signs. He would pray and demand and hope the universe would answer in thunder. But now he had learned to read the signs in smaller ways. In the way a bird paused on his windowsill, in the quiet pull of intuition, in the way his heart whispered yes, even when his mind was filled with doubt. These were the real signs, not the ones that shouted, but the ones that nudged. He once told a friend, "The universe is always speaking, but it speaks in a language only silence can hear." And so he cultivated that silence. He made space for it. He walked slowly, ate mindfully, spoke with purpose. He no longer tried to fill every moment. He let moments unfold on their own. People began to come to him, not for advice, but for presence. They felt safe around him, not because he had all the answers, but because he wasn't pretending to. He had made peace with not knowing. He had stopped performing certainty, and in that space, others found permission to drop their mask too. One man came to him, full of anger. Life had betrayed him. He had lost his job, his partner, his sense of self. He was drowning in rage, in grief. He sat across from the quiet man and poured out his pain. When he was done, the man simply asked, "What are you afraid will happen if you stop holding on to this pain?" The question struck deeper than any advice ever could. Because the truth is, sometimes we hold on to our pain not because we want to, but because it's the only identity we have left. We become so used to the ache that we fear who will be without it. But freedom begins when we're willing to let go, not just of the past, but of the version of ourselves that was built in response to it. The man began to see his pain not as a curse, but as a teacher. It didn't leave right away, it stayed, but it no longer ruled him. It became a companion, a reminder of what he had endured. And slowly it began to soften, not because he forced it to, but because he stopped feeding it with resistance. You see, there's a wisdom in not forcing things, in allowing the soil to settle before planting new seeds, in letting your heart rest before chasing a new dream, in taking the time to become who you need to be before you step into the life that is waiting for you. This is not laziness. This is alignment. The seasons never rush. They know the beauty of timing. Spring does not arrive before winter has finished its quiet work. The flowers bloom only when the earth is ready to receive them. And your life is no different. So if you are in winter, let it be. If everything is still, let it be. If you feel lost, let it be. Do not rush to fill the space. Do not mistake stillness for stagnation. You are not stuck. You are settling. You are being emptied so you can be filled anew. One morning, the man awoke to the sound of distant music. It came from the town square. Children were dancing, elders were singing, and for the first time in a long time, he felt joy that had no reason. It wasn't attached to achievement, to love, to success. It was just there, soft, unearned, complete. And he understood then what the hermit had meant, that the fifth sign, the shift, is not always dramatic. Sometimes it arrives in a quiet joy, in a peace that feels like home, in a moment when you realize you are no longer waiting for your life to begin, because it already has. Not out there, but here, within you, right now. There's a moment in the quiet healing of a person when they no longer reach for what used to comfort them. Not because the pain has vanished completely, but because they've learned to sit with it. They've befriended it in a strange, unspoken way. There's power in that moment, an invisible shift. The shift from running to returning, the shift from hiding in noise to breathing through silence. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. But something within whispers, you've changed. The man who once climbed the mountain and returned a student of stillness had changed too. The people around him couldn't always put their finger on it, but they felt it. He wasn't louder, or more charming, or more successful, but he carried a gravity, a rootedness, that made others slow down in his presence. He didn't demand attention. He didn't need it. The peace within him spoke more than words ever could. There was a woman who came to him, eyes weary, spirit bruised. She had tried to follow every path the world offered, career, relationships, approval, and each one had left her more tired than the last. She said, "I've done everything right. I've worked hard. I've stayed loyal. I've tried to be good. Why do I still feel like I'm falling apart?" He listened, not to reply, but to truly hear. When she finished, he spoke softly. "Because you've been building a life from the outside in. But the soul doesn't live in applause. It lives in presence, and yours is asking you to return." "Return to what?" she asked. "To yourself," he said. That answer stayed with her, and though it wasn't immediate, something began to shift. She stopped chasing the next milestone. She started walking without a destination, cooking without a reason, speaking without the need to be understood. Slowly, gently, she began to hear her own voice again. Not the one shaped by expectation, but the one that whispered from within. It's a voice we all have, the voice that speaks in moments of stillness, that nudges us toward truth, that aches when we betray ourselves. But the world is loud. It teaches us to drown that voice in distraction, in doing, in pleasing, in proving. And so we forget that our most profound wisdom doesn't come from outside, but from deep within, from the part of us that remembers who we are, even when we don't. The man remembered when he had lost that voice. It had happened quietly over time, as he tried to be who others needed him to be. It wasn't malicious, it was survival. He became adaptable, agreeable, acceptable. And in doing so, he drifted from his own center. It wasn't until everything fell apart that he realized how far he had wandered. And in the rubble of that life, he began to rebuild, not with blueprints drawn by others, but with the raw honesty of his own intuition. That's the true path, not a straight line, but a spiral, a coming back, again and again, each time deeper, each time truer. People often asked him now, "How do I know if I'm on the right path?" And he would answer, "When it no longer requires you to abandon yourself. Because the path meant for you will never ask you to silence your truth. It will never demand that you become smaller, quieter, less alive. It will challenge you, yes, but it will also nourish you. It will stretch you, but not break you. And it will always, always feel like a return." One morning, the man went walking near the edge of the forest and met an old friend, someone from his past, from the days before the mountain. The friend looked him over and said, "You seem different." He smiled. "I am." "Are you happier now?" the friend asked. He paused. I am more at peace, and to me, that's better. Peace, the kind that doesn't need conditions, the kind that isn't shaken by storms, the kind that doesn't come from having everything, but from needing less. That peace had come from letting go. Letting go of what others thought, letting go of what didn't feel true, letting go of the belief that struggle was a sign of worth. He had learned that you don't have to suffer endlessly to earn joy. You just have to stop chasing what was never meant for you. There's a tree that grows at the edge of the village. It's twisted, weathered, bent by decades of wind and rain. But it stands, not tall, not straight, but rooted. Children climb it, lovers sit beneath it, elders lean on it. And though it isn't perfect by any conventional measure, it gives shade, it offers beauty, and it continues to grow. Not despite its scars, but because of them. That tree, the man often thought, was like his journey. Not polished, not linear, but deeply real. You begin to understand after a while that healing is not about returning to who you were before the pain. It's about becoming someone new because of it. Stronger, softer, wiser, less reactive, more aware, less attached, more aligned. And with that understanding, everything changes. You stop fearing solitude because you've learned it's where you hear the clearest truth. You stop fearing endings because you know they are beginnings in disguise. You stop fearing uncertainty because you've walked through it and emerged still breathing. And one day, without planning it, you'll find yourself in the middle of a life that feels like home. Not perfect, but real. Not always joyful, but always yours. You'll be sitting under a tree or walking by the river or laughing with a friend, and suddenly you'll realize you are no longer waiting for your life to begin. It already has. You are in it, fully, finally, freely. And the path that once felt so hard, so dark, so endless, will now seem like the most sacred thing that ever happened to you. Because it brought you back to this moment, to your truth, to yourself. There's something sacred about the moment you realize you no longer need to be seen to feel real. That moment when you stop measuring your life through the eyes of others, when their praise no longer intoxicates you and their silence no longer destroys you. It's a quiet awakening, unannounced, unnoticed by the world, but monumental within. It's when you start living from the inside out, not chasing validation, but honoring alignment. Not performing presence, but embodying truth. The man who once climbed the mountain had stopped chasing applause. He didn't walk the village streets hoping for recognition. He didn't retell his story to impress others. He simply lived, present, rooted, enough. There was a softness in him now, but not a fragile one. It was the softness that comes after being broken and pieced back together with gold. A strength made of tenderness, of knowing, of surrender. One day, a young boy approached him, timid and uncertain. He had heard stories about the man and wanted to ask something that had weighed on his heart. "Is it wrong," the boy asked, "to want people to like you?" The man looked at him for a moment, then knelt so their eyes could meet. "No," he said gently, "but it becomes harmful when you forget to like yourself first." The boy's brows furrowed. "But how do I know who I really am?" The man smiled. "You stop asking others to tell you." That simple exchange echoed deeply in the boy's heart, and in time, he would carry those words into his life like a compass, guiding him through the confusing maze of growing up. It's easy to lose yourself in the echo of other people's opinions. It's easy to shape your words, your smile, your dreams to fit their expectations. We are raised in a world that teaches us to perform from an early age, to earn praise, to gain approval, to be good enough. And in the process, many forget their own voice. They forget how to move without an audience. But there comes a moment, sometimes after heartbreak, sometimes after loss, sometimes in the middle of silence, when you begin to wonder, what if I stopped trying to be liked and started trying to be true? And that question, though small, is the beginning of a transformation. The man remembered when that question first found him. It came in the hollow of his lowest season, when no one was watching and everything felt lost. At first, the question felt like a threat. He had built so much of his identity around being what others needed. Who would he be if he let that go? But slowly in the silence, the answer began to emerge, not as a conclusion, but as a direction. He didn't have to have it all figured out. He just had to start walking toward what felt honest. Honesty became his new compass. Not brutal honesty that cuts, but gentle honesty that heals. He no longer lied to himself to stay comfortable. He no longer said yes when his body said no. He no longer chased things that glittered but did not glow. He discovered that truth doesn't always feel good at first, but it always feels clean. It doesn't always bring applause, but it always brings peace. And with that peace came clarity. Clarity about who he was, clarity about what mattered, clarity about where he wanted to go. Not because the path was now easy, but because it was finally his. One day he stood by the river watching the water move. A stranger joined him, someone passing through the village, searching for something they couldn't name. "What do you do here?" the stranger asked. "I live," he replied. "No," the stranger insisted. "I mean, what do you do for meaning?" The man looked at the river, then back at the stranger. "I stopped looking for meaning outside of this." The stranger frowned. "That's it?" "That's everything." The stranger left unconvinced. But later, as he wandered through the forest, the echo of those words began to soften something in him. Maybe, just maybe, he had been looking too hard, too far, for something that was already with him all along. The man didn't live a grand life by the world's standards. He had no titles, no riches, no fame. But he had presence, he had integrity, he had a life that felt real. And in that reality, others found refuge. Not because he saved them, but because he reminded them they could save themselves. He would say, "The most powerful thing you can do is become so rooted in yourself that nothing external can shake your peace." And he meant it. Because he had been shaken. He had been unmoored. He had felt the collapse of everything he thought he needed. But on the other side of that collapse, he had found something immovable, his own soul. That's what life does if you let it. It strips away the false. It breaks the surface so you can find the deep. It removes what you think you are to reveal who you've always been. And once you find that, once you touch that stillness within, you no longer need to grasp. You stop proving, you stop performing, you start being. And being is more than enough. So when the world tries to pull you back into the race, into the rush, into the noise, pause, listen. Ask yourself, am I chasing approval? Or am I following peace? And if the answer is the former, return. Not to the world, but to yourself. Because your life doesn't need to look impressive to be meaningful. It just needs to feel true to you. There is a kind of transformation that doesn't arrive with fireworks or a grand revelation. It slips in quietly, like the light before sunrise. It begins not in the loud moments of certainty, but in the uncertain spaces where everything you once relied on no longer holds. The floor beneath you crumbles. The map you used to navigate life fades. And for a time, you're left in the in-between. No longer who you were, not yet who you're becoming. Most people panic in this place. They claw at the old, desperate for something familiar. They rush forward, trying to fill the silence. But those who wait, those who sit, who breathe, who let the darkness do its work, emerge changed. The man who had returned from the mountain knew this place well. It had once felt like exile, but now he understood it was initiation. The space between identities, between illusions and truth, was not a punishment. It was a passage, a sacred, necessary dismantling of everything that wasn't real so that what was real could rise. And though he had once resisted it, now he welcomed it in others. There was a young man in the village who was going through his own unraveling. He had followed all the rules of the world, earned the right degrees, gotten the right job, entered the right relationship. On paper, he was thriving, but inside he felt hollow. Each success felt like wearing a beautiful mask that didn't belong to him. And then, one by one, those outer layers began to fall. He lost his job, the relationship ended, and the identity he had built so carefully collapsed. He wandered the village like a ghost of himself, unable to explain his sorrow because no one around him understood how a life that looked so right could feel so wrong. Eventually, he found himself sitting beside the quiet man. He didn't ask for advice. He didn't know what to say, but something about the man's presence made it safe to speak the truth. "I don't know who I am anymore," he said. The man didn't flinch at the words. Instead, he smiled gently. "That means you're closer to who you really are than you've ever been." The young man looked confused. "But I've lost everything." The quiet man nodded. "You've lost what wasn't yours to begin with." And with those few words, the unraveling took on a new shape. It wasn't destruction, it was revelation. Most people live their entire lives in masks they mistake for skin. They build identities around survival, around being needed, admired, accepted. But true selfhood begins when those identities no longer fit, when the roles become cages, when the applause feels empty, when the striving leaves you exhausted. That is the sacred call to return. Not to the person you were told to be, but to the person you were before the world taught you to forget. The quiet man remembered when that call first came for him. It didn't feel sacred, it felt terrifying. He had just lost someone he loved deeply, someone who had shaped his idea of the future. And when they left, they took that vision with them. He wandered, broken-hearted, clinging to the dream that had died. For months he tried to revive it, hoping that maybe if he just waited long enough, it would return. But it didn't. And eventually he stopped reaching for what was gone. He sat in the ruins and let the silence swallow him. And there, in that silence, something unexpected happened. He heard his own voice for the first time in years. Not the voice shaped by grief or longing, not the one molded by ambition or expectation, but a quieter voice, a deeper one. A voice that didn't demand anything, didn't perform, didn't explain. It simply was. And in that voice, he found the beginning of a new path, not one mapped out by the world, but one revealed moment by moment from within. That's how it always begins, with listening. Not to the noise of the world, but to the whisper of the soul. The whisper that says, what if you let it all fall? What if you stopped trying to be everything for everyone? What if you allowed yourself to be nothing but true? But listening is hard in a world that rewards noise. The world will tell you to keep moving, keep achieving, keep proving. It will tell you that silence is laziness, that stillness is weakness. And so many keep running, keep climbing, keep pretending, until one day the pretending breaks them, and they're forced to stop. That stopping is not the end, it's the beginning. The young man who had lost everything began to see his life differently. He started asking questions he had never dared to ask before. What do I actually want? What feels real to me? What parts of my life are reflections of someone else's dream? The more he asked, the more the answers began to rise. Not from his mind, but from a deeper place. A knowing that didn't speak in logic, but in feeling. And as he followed that feeling, he began to build again. Not quickly, not perfectly, but honestly. He started painting, something he had loved as a child but abandoned for more productive pursuits. He spent time in nature. He stopped explaining himself to people who didn't want to understand. He let go of the idea that his worth needed to be proven, and slowly a new life began to form. Not outside in, but inside out. The quiet man saw this shift and knew it well. He had watched it in many. The way they come undone before they come alive. The way their hearts break before they open. The way they lose what they thought they needed before they find what truly matters. It's a path not everyone chooses. Many return to the familiar, even if it suffocates them, because the unknown is scary, because truth requires shedding the masks. But those who choose it, those who walk through the fire, emerge transformed, not into someone new, but into someone true. The man believed that the greatest act of courage in this world is not to conquer others, but to meet yourself fully, to sit with your fears, your grief, your longing, to face the parts of you that were silenced long ago, to unearth the wounds and tend to them, not with shame, but with care. He knew that healing doesn't come from fixing what's broken, but from loving it, wholly, fiercely, unconditionally. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, and painted the sky in soft gold. A woman sat beside the man in the quiet of the field. "I used to think healing meant I'd go back to who I was before everything hurt me," she said. "But now I think I'm never going back. And maybe that's okay." He nodded. "Healing doesn't take you backward, it takes you inward." She smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "It's strange. I thought I had lost myself, but now I think I'm meeting myself for the first time. And that is the miracle of the journey. You do not return to who you were. You arrive finally in who you are. And when you do, the world looks different. Not because it has changed, but because you have. There comes a time in every soul's journey when the external world loses its grip, when the things that once seemed so important begin to fall from your hands like sand. It doesn't always happen with dramatic finality. Often it happens slowly, like the way seasons shift without asking permission. A little less urgency to reply, a little more longing for silence, a subtle yearning for authenticity, even when it costs you comfort. And when this transformation takes root, it doesn't feel like becoming more. It feels like shedding, like letting go, like coming home. The man who had returned from the mountain, now a steady presence in the village, had long stopped trying to explain this process to others. He had found that words often got in the way. It was something you had to live to understand, something you could only grasp once everything you thought mattered had faded, and only what truly did remained. There was a mother in the village, a woman who had spent her life caring for others, holding things together, being the one everyone leaned on. She was respected, admired, loved by many. Yet inside she felt hollow, not broken, not sad, just distant from herself. She had spent so long being what others needed that she had forgotten what she needed. And so, late one evening, when the village had gone quiet and the weight of everything she carried grew too heavy, she walked to the edge of the woods and found the man sitting beneath his favorite tree. She didn't speak for a long time, just sat in the stillness, letting the night breathe around them. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "I don't know who I am when I'm not helping someone." He looked at her with eyes that held no judgment, only understanding. "Then maybe," he said gently, "it's time to help yourself." The words landed not like a command, but like a blessing. For the first time in her life, she was given permission to rest, to receive, to turn inward without guilt. And this is the wound so many carry silently, the belief that their worth is tied to their usefulness, that if they're not giving, fixing, pleasing, they're not enough. But the soul was never meant to be currency. You don't earn your right to exist through exhaustion. You are not here to be everything to everyone. You are here to be wholly yourself. The man had learned this through the painful unraveling of his own patterns. In his younger years, he too had tried to prove his worth through what he could offer, waiting for a call, a message, a sign that you mattered, waiting for change, for proof, for effort. All the while, your life stood still in those places, paused at the intersection of hope and disappointment. But now you move, you return, you light those shadows with your own presence. And oh, how powerful that presence is when it no longer pleads to be seen, when it simply is, solid, sacred, enough. You'll notice you're no longer drawn to chaos, that the people who once pulled you in with intensity now feel heavy to your spirit. That silence no longer feels like abandonment, but like breath. That being alone isn't empty, it's expansive. You have space now, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Space for yourself, for your thoughts, for your healing, for your joy. And in that space, something beautiful begins to bloom. You start to fall in love with your own rhythm. You wake up and smile at the simplicity of peace. You cook your meals with intention, light candles without waiting for someone to join you. Go for walks without needing a hand to hold. You become your own sanctuary, your own source, your own home. There may still be moments of ache. Healing isn't forgetting, it's forgiving. Not them, but yourself. For the time you spent hoping, for the ways you shrank, for the love you gave that was never returned. You forgive yourself not because you were wrong, but because you were learning. And what a tender, necessary lesson it was. You'll start to speak differently too. Softer, clearer, with less need to convince or explain. You don't owe anyone a breakdown of your boundaries. You don't need to justify your peace. Your no becomes enough. Your silence becomes sacred. You no longer seek to be understood by those who only listen to respond. You reserve your truth for those who hold it with care. You'll also notice how much you've grown when someone similar to the one you let go returns in a new form. The same patterns, the same red flags, the same sweet words with no follow-through. But this time, you don't engage. You don't entertain. Not because you're afraid, but because you're aware. Because now your love is too sacred to be wasted. Because you no longer confuse attraction with alignment or intensity with intimacy. You've become a new version of yourself. Not hardened, not closed, but sovereign. You've learned that detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's the ability to love without losing yourself, to give without emptying, to care without carrying. And the most beautiful part? You begin to attract what aligns with this new energy. People who see you, not just for what you offer, but for who you are. Opportunities that match your new frequency. Connections that don't need fixing, only nurturing. But even without those things, you are already whole. That's the truth you carry now. That no matter who stays or goes, you remain. Steady, worthy, enough. So continue walking. Continue choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, truth over attachment. Every step you take in alignment with your worth is a step toward the life you were always meant to live. And one day when you least expect it, you'll look at yourself in the mirror, not to assess, not to critique, but to smile. Because the person looking back at you will not be the one who once waited, pleaded, or proved. It will be someone rooted, someone radiant, someone free. There will come a day when the echo of their name no longer shakes your foundation, when the thought of them no longer stirs the storm inside your chest. Not because you forgot, not because the memory was erased, but because you have grown into someone who no longer needs to hold on to what hurt. You will still remember their smile, their voice, the way they once made the world feel a little more colorful, but you'll also remember the silence they left behind, the way their absence felt louder than their presence. And with both truths in your hands, you'll be able to finally let go with grace. Because healing is not about pretending the love didn't exist. It's about realizing that love, to be real, must be returned. It must be tended to, nurtured, protected. Otherwise, it becomes a wound disguised as hope. You no longer mistake longing for loyalty. You no longer wear your suffering as a badge of love. You have lived through the ache of being unseen, unheard, and unchosen. And from that ache, something beautiful has grown: discernment. You begin to see the world differently. Not everyone deserves your softness. Not every connection deserves your devotion. You used to hand out pieces of your soul in the hope someone would see their value. Now you hold those pieces close, offering them only where there is honor. And this isn't bitterness. It's wisdom. It's the calm that comes after the fire, the clarity that comes after the storm. You no longer look for love that consumes. You look for love that holds. And until that love arrives, you are no longer waiting.